thank you for joining us tonight. It's Tuesday evening. We're going to be talking about the, what foundation is it? The fourth foundation.
Yes, sir.
This is episode 5, the fourth foundation. So the first one, if I can go back in my mental Rolodex, the first one was to love God with all heart, soul, and mind, strength, etc. The second one was to
hate sin.
Hate sin. The third one was to hide the word.
Mm-hmm.
And then today, tonight, the foundational truth that we want you to have for your family, for us to have with ours, biblically speaking, as we go down the order, is to set your mind where Christ is. There's Bible for that.
Yes, sir.
What verse do you got for that?
Colossians chapter 3, verse 1. If then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things of the earth.
That's kind of hard because this is where I live.
Yeah.
And I have to do today to day.
That's right.
You go to when you have eye trouble, you go to an ophthalmologist or an optometrist, depending on what you need for your eyeball. Somebody who is always looking at the negative. What do we call those folks?
Pessimistic.
Pessimistic, also negative Nancy. If you're named Nancy, I'm so sorry. Hope you're not negative. But somebody who's pessimist, they have a bad view. Somebody who is optimist has a good view.
Good view.
God calls all of our eyes to be optimistic. Literally speaking, put your eyes where Christ is, off of the world. Now, I hear that, but we kind of chuckled about it. How do I live day to day, yet my eyes are elsewhere?
Yeah, challenging thought, really, when, as you mentioned, our time is here on this earth, and so we're presented with that challenge to where we take our eyes, or focus, if you will, off of the things of the earth and on things above. So I think certainly the foundation has been set for that, Jake, when we've talked about the other three things that we are to focus on. If we're getting those things right, I think there's going to be more of a tendency for us to be able to set as a permanent focus the things that are above where Christ is at.
So it's kind of spiritual.
Sure.
Spirit, it's physical, or it manifests itself, meaning it shows itself or plays out, fleshes out physically, but there's a spiritual emphasis behind it.
That's right.
I can't necessarily always see this in a physical, tangible way, but I can see it spiritually, or I can, as some would say, as you can see down the road.
Right.
You know, if I look down the road, this is going to happen. That's kind of where we're at.
Sure.
Keep your mind elsewhere. If you were to, ask husbands and wives that divorce or families that break up, you know that either one or both parties or everybody in the house, their vision is not Jesus-centered.
That's right. Every
Every marriage is salvageable if both husband and wife will be Jesus in a relationship. It's 100% guaranteed.
That's right.
So every marriage, it don't matter how bad it is, no matter what's going on, every marriage is salvageable if both people will be Jesus, forgiving like Jesus, humble, and all those things. But this is the idea of maybe anxiety. Anxiety can run the roost in a lot of houses. We have to live in the world, we have to work in the world, and the world is not always kind.
Right.
And especially, as Paul told Timothy, if you're going to be a Christian, expect to suffer as a Christian. And that's good, but it also weighs on you physically.
Right.
You probably don't like to do this. I sure don't like to do this, but if we're not careful, it'll happen. We'll bring the effects of work home and lay it out on our families in a bad way.
Very much so. And it can get to the point to where it creates a wedge, where every day when you're coming home and bringing that, you're driving the stake further, and that wedge just widens and it splits to the point to where there's an inability to be connected as a family. And then certainly your chance of impact and centering the entire family and focus, where it should be is compromised, for sure.
Yeah, and especially if we're talking about, where I come in and I throw my bad feelings out on somebody and I take out the day on a person. That's not good. But think about anxiety in another way, or in a way that, we're told to not be anxious for nothing. And we'll get to this a little bit later, but if I'm told that that I'm not to worry, that's harder for some people than it is for others.
Right.
Let's use an analogy. Let's just imagine that the sun did not come up tomorrow. We go to bed and we wake up and my clock says 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. or whatever time you get up, and the moon is still out and the sun doesn't spin around, or rather we don't spin around the sun. We're able to survive, but think about the plants are going to die because they're not getting sun. The animals are going to die because they're not able to eat the plants and the grass and the berries and so on. We're going to die because there's neither grass nor meat to eat. We are so depending upon something that is outside of our control.
That's right.
I don't even think about it. I think they did a study, National Geographic did, about the eyesight of those in Alaska and those who go for seasons of time not seeing the sun. And what it does is it detriments their eyes. It hurts their eyes in a way that if they had sun all year round, it wouldn't.
Interesting.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
But some things are outside of our control.
Certainly.
But yet we act like that they are in our control, or we lose our mind the fact that we can't control it.
Right. And I love the analogy, Jake. To me, on the surface, as I read it, I thought, well, maybe that's a little bit extreme, but I think it's appropriate because, let's take, for example, someone coming along a few months ago and saying, okay, in a few months, there's going to be this very contagious virus that is going to take over, and you are going to be confined to your home. You're not going to be able to work. Best case scenario, you might be able to go out with the other folks to the grocery store and buy things, and you can't see your brethren at worship. You can't do so many things. You got to cover your face, and in some cases you might even be stopped by a cop and threatened to fine because you're out doing non-essential business or whatever the case may be. Imagine a time of that. If we had thought back to this, let's just say 6 months ago, we would have considered that extreme.
Oh yeah,
probably.
Oh yeah.
And you're right. In those instances, like what has happened now, and in an instance like this analogy here, all of a sudden there is the tendency for you and I to feel as if we have no control. Mm-hmm. I think that reveals a lot. I think it's a great time for us to be very transparent and to see, am I focused and completely dependent upon the Lord? Because in these moments, what am I scrambling to do? Is there a feeling of hopelessness? This is a very real situation. They're talking publicly about how a time such as this, because of the effect that it has on our economy, small business owners and other people that are struggling to provide right now because they're out of work, there's thoughts of suicide and depression that those cases are mounting, and those situations present themselves. So it's a very, in some cases, dire situation. As you mentioned, we certainly want to be understanding of that, because there are some folks that do have more of an issue with the fearful tendencies, and so there are legitimate situations. But yeah, certainly it's put to the test in that case. How are we then living our lives each and every day? Does God look down upon us and say, "Oh, you have little faith"?
Yeah.
You're considered about this, or you're worried about this and this and this and this, and you won't relinquish control. You have no, or try to relinquish, because you have no control over it anyway. I think about some of the passages, Colossians chapter 1, which, we were going to in verse 15. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven, that are on earth, visible, invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things consist. Do we live our life in our home? And would it evidence the fact that we believe that all things, in him all things consist?
And we're not talking about just creation. Of course, creation is listed there.
Sure.
The Son is in he speaks all of that to continue and to continue to do what it does. He even speaks the rays to go down and to photosynthesis to take. That's a word that we have, but that's probably not what he calls it. But he has it to do something that we need. We don't even think about it.
Right.
If I think back of what all is out of my control, almost everything is absolutely out of my. And what he doesn't just list creation in here. He says all things, thrones, dominions, rulers, or authorities. So even the government. Now, this isn't to say everything the government does is right.
Right.
But it is for the church's good.
That's right.
It can be for our good. Doesn't mean that it is good.
Right.
But it can. I mean, like in Kentucky, brethren are getting written citations and getting notices put on their car window because if you come back here, we're going to put you on a 14-day notice of quarantine, and if you don't obey that, we're going to put you in jail.
That's right.
Okay, so now we're stepping over into something that is physically detrimental, but just as you know as well as I know, as well as they know, prison can be for your good.
Right.
I mean, you can. Paul wasn't Paul wasn't concerned where he was.
Yeah.
I mean, if he was chained to a guard, he'd convert the guard. That's
How
just kind of
amazing.
man that he was.
Oh.
What do you do with somebody like that? You kill them? That's where they'd rather go anyway.
Right.
So there's
Right.
nothing you can do with a human being like that, whose eyes are really focused on the Lord, even though whatever situation that they're in.
Right.
But the last part of that, he says that we're created through him and for him. So Jesus is the one we know is the Word who spoke all of this into existence. He is before all things, shows his preeminence. And in him, all things hold together, meaning it continues to do what it does. He is in control. When you hear that statement, either bring comfort, that either brings comfort to your ears, or that brings constraint to your ears. Because if I'm a person who struggles and wrestles with my problems, and I struggle with what I cannot control, that right there bothers me.
Yeah.
But if I'm a person who says, okay, you know what, I have to endure this, I can't help it, I'm doing the best that I can do, but I'm just going to put my eyes on the Lord, and I'm going to let the Lord worry about it.
Yeah.
That's a sense of freedom and rest and peace to say, I'm not saved from that situation, but I am saved through that situation.
Yep.
Psalm 23 and verse 4, I will walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Okay, that tells me he's walking through it. That's a horrible situation. But he says, I'm not afraid, you're with me.
That's right.
So that's wild to think about.
Right.
But let's think about this thought for just a second. When we trust that the Lord is capable, we will set our minds on him and not our ability to hold everything together. As a father, I am concerned about the salvation of my 4-year-old child.
Right.
Not now. I know that his soul is safe. But there's going to come a point in time where I wonder, is the world going to influence and impact him in a way that he will follow and that he will swallow hook, line, and sinker and never come back to God's people or the fold? I worry about that as a husband. Now, to what extent is it okay that we worry about those things?
Well, certainly, I don't even know if I would term it worry, but maybe more so concern. Concern about just fulfilling what the God-given duties we've been given. Where I think the concern comes in is if we fail our children by not doing the things that God has said. If I am in my home to the point to where I'm in a consistent mode of provoking my children to wrath because I'm constantly beating them down or constantly nagging them or whatever the case may be, then what I've done is I've taken that child and I've steered them in a different direction. I've steered them away from the path of the Lord. And so therefore, there needs to be a concern on my part, and certainly, an effort to redirect that and, of course, change that. However, if we're properly centered and we're doing all that we can with that, I think we have to just realize what the Proverbs writer says is that we are to train a child in the way he should go. We point that direction, we guide in that direction, but at some point the Lord intended for you and I to raise our children to the point where they're ready to leave home, they know the way they should go, and then the decision is theirs. We've got to now, I'm not there yet, Jake. My children, the oldest one is 10, so I have not yet reached that point where I can see him moving out on his own and letting go of that. So certainly, this is down the road in my home So maybe it's a little bit easier for me to say, but at some point with that, I have to, as they say, let go and let God continue to provide the path for him, and know that he'll make good decisions.
Concern, not worry.
Right.
Worrying is like rocking in a rocking chair. It's a whole lot of work, but you're not getting anywhere.
That's right.
To be concerned about something is to show that that this has value to me, and that I am being the steward that God would have me to be in this situation, to whatever I have before me.
There's purpose. Yeah, absolutely.
All of those things. But to say, but it crosses over from concern to worry when I act like that God's not in control and God's not going to take care of this, and somehow God is going to leave me alone in this situation.
Right.
The 1 Corinthians passage where he says, if anybody thinks that he stands, take heed lest he fall. We think about that in the context of pride, but in the context, it's about people who forget that God is still with them, even though Moses wasn't with them in Israel, or when he didn't come down that 40 days, they began to worry, and they fell. And he was saying, whatever kind of mindset that they had that caused them to fall, you'll do the same if you think the same way. If you act like that God's not there, even though it looks like for 40 days they didn't have God, if you think that it's not happening or he's not in control, you're going to fall.
That's right.
So I have to be secure and to know that he has got this, and he's always had this. And this was something, life is something that he upholds by the word of his power. And so to fret about something, to act like that's not him, it's almost blasphemous.
Right.
And it becomes a sin.
That's right.
When I become anxious to say that, well, God's not in control, God can't control this, and if I get sick, I'll die, or we'll be bankrupt, or whatever. So that's when it becomes from just being concerned. It's good to be concerned and to take thought, but on the other hand, Jesus said, take no thought for your life.
Right.
Meaning that the idea literally means to take it up, to look at it, to examine it, and not let go. You've seen some people who they take a hold of something and they don't let go of it, and it winds up being to their downfall. Right. When it's a problem or something like that.
Exactly.
Have you ever felt like, and this is what happens when we worry, like daydreaming is good, not in class when you're looking up and you're thinking
That's right.
this, and you come by and the teacher slaps your head with a ruler.
Right.
Oh, they can't do that today. That's right. That only happened to me.
Right.
But anyway, daydreaming is good, but only in certain situations. You don't want to daydream while you're driving down the road. You wouldn't want to daydream when your wife's delivering a child.
Right.
She's going to slap you in the next year.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
But it's the case that daydreaming, we call it that, but what it is where our mind is somewhere else from where we physically are.
Right.
That's a lack of focus. I'm told to put my eyes on things where Christ is. He's seated at the right hand. Right hand always represented authority in the Bible. Jesus said this in Matthew 28. All authority has been given to me. I'm told to just put my eyes there. Live in the world, yes. As Paul said, not be a hermit. Don't convent away. But put your eyes there, but live in this world. He's holding all things. He's taking care of all things. And I need to make sure that I'm giving that to my wife, to my child, to say, well, the Lord's going to take care of that. And I don't want to say that flippantly,
right,
or willy-nilly, but I also want to be ready to say that, even if I don't always feel that. Right. You have any thoughts?
Well, just thinking about that focus, maybe the tendency is that we can go to the other extreme, and to me, this is a lack of focus as well, because it removes what the Lord designed as our intent within His kingdom, and that is to use it as an excuse to not act, where we claim that we've given everything. We've got our eyes on Jesus, and we've given everything up to Him to the point to where, okay, well then I don't really have to do anything.
Right.
I'm just going to let go and let God, and I don't have to search for a job. If I'm unemployed, He's going to drop it in my lap, or whatever the case is. So we could certainly go to the other extreme.
Right.
But, the Christian's mind is over and over is called to be, focused and sober. And the thing that I think of is what we've what I've used before is laser focused, where that laser beam is straight as an arrow. It's hitting its target and it's not moving, and it is steady. And really, in a sense, as you view that or think of that, it is immovable. And so that's where we're called, over and over in Scripture as a focus for our mind. So,
it's like the old ball coach, whether you played, whatever coach you had. I watched one of my coaches grab a player by the face mask and tell him, get your head in the game.
Right.
Because he wasn't there.
That's right.
He was physically there, but he wasn't mentally there, and that caused all kinds of discombobulation. Are you in 1 Peter 3?
I am. 1 Peter 1.
1 Peter 1? What do you have there?
Verse 13, therefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ.
Gird up your loins. The Hebrew warriors understood this, even the Roman warriors understood that they might have, especially the Hebrews, the way they girded up their loins is they would take up their I guess tunic, if you will, and it would be loose, and they would tie it up around their knees, and they would go to war that way. So there has to be get a seriousness of your mind and wake up, if you will, and do what you're supposed to do.
That's right.
And do your part, but it's not works alone and it's not faith alone.
That's
But
right.
it's a mixture of the two where you put faith. It's like one of the fellows said, pray like it's all up to God and work like it's all up to you. And I kind of understand that analogy. But I got to have my mind to say, okay, I got to do my part and be a good steward. To the guy, the bum on the couch with eating Doritos and whatever, and saying, well, the Lord will provide me a job. Yeah, when you do your diligence to go get one.
That's right.
If you don't provide for your own, you're worse than an unbeliever. So there's ways in which God works these things out in your life per Scripture. But this be sober-mindedness, what my mind goes to is 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 3 and 4. His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises. That's the word I want to talk about. Promises, so that through the promises, you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. So in verse 5, for this very reason, because God has done his part.
That's right.
You do your part. Verse 5, for this very reason, make every effort, or be diligent is the idea, to supplement your faith with virtue. The make every effort and the supplement, this is somewhere in the mix of there, I believe is the word symphosos, is this where we get our word symphony. Where we sing together. I was Romans 6, planted. That's where the symphosos begins. That's the word. I began to sing and lead this song or be in this symphony orchestra with the Lord. But now, in which Colossians 1:12, 14, 15, it's his work. It's his operating. That in my baptism, it's the operation of God. It's not me. Yes, I got in the water. Yes, I went under. Yes, I come up. But that's not what saved me.
That's right.
What saved me is that God says, I promised you in this act that you do, I'm making you one with my son.
Right.
And I'll raise you just like he was raised.
Right.
Just as that happens, my part of singing the song is supplementing what he has done. Not to say his work is insufficient. Not to say that it's something that well, he needs help. He needs my help to do this. No, he's designed you for this work.
That's right.
You keep singing this way, and he gives a list of all these different things. If you're sitting there with your family or you're watching this and you're going to use this with your family later, whatever the case is, the question that I would like for you to ask your family is, where do we have a hard time focusing as a family, maybe as individuals, and how do we remedy this? And that's something just for you and your family. You know where you are. There has to be a sit-down meeting of sorts and say, this is unruly.
Yes.
Or we're not good stewards in this way. Or mama or daddy have a hard time with this, or son, daughter, we're noticing this. And mamas and daddies have to be mamas and daddies, and kids have to be kids.
Sure.
But that's something that you need to make sure that you're asking. You need to have a sit down and say, in what way can we get better? And not to say that we're not good enough as we are, or we're not good, but to say, is there something that's lacking? Where is our focus? Is it off? You know, I said this Sunday night in my lesson that you see some mamas and daddies, they get upset that their children aren't following Jesus still, but mamas and daddies have been putting a ball and a bat in their hand and a helmet on their head
That's right.
for the past 7 years of their life, more than anything else. And so their children are getting older, and their focus isn't on things of above. It's everything that mom and daddy put in their hand.
That's right.
So, not to say you don't have your children in those things, because in my lesson I talked about your children being in the world.
Right.
But the focus is off.
Yeah.
When children depart.
You know, and this could certainly be different in every home. That's why, you know, as Jake mentioned, this is good for you to spend with your family and ask this question. But just as an example, one of the things for us with 4 children that are young, that are dependent, the time element is probably the biggest challenge there because of their responsibility. You know, listen, our routine has been hijacked. It has, with this situation, and now all of a sudden my wife is in a scenario where she is having to facilitate the education, at least in part, of 2 girls that were having that facilitated by other people. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden the routine in that sense has been hijacked. And so all of a sudden there's a shift, and maybe there's a time element issue. And what have we done as parents to make the adjustments that need to be made, so as there's still time for our children to understand, we spend and reflect upon Jesus and Him above. And you know, in 2 Peter, doing our part in verse 5, when he's talking about adding these things to you, to your life and to your faith, what you see here is a picture of that person that is focused and centered on those things that are above, because all of these things are going to allow the spiritual maturity to develop. And one of the things that jumped out to me is the self-control, the discipline that exists there. Well, that's not going to happen by accident, Jake. It's going to have to be something that maybe perhaps as a time like this, where we have to shift some things and we have to change the routine. We may have to change a various number of things, you know, in order to adapt within our home to make sure the focus is still above. Because any slight shift, a parent losing a job, and all of a sudden there's a worry that's developing, and so much time and emotional energy is spent maybe worrying about that and doing their part to try to find a job, but maybe it creates an exhaustion, and all of a sudden there is not as much time with that single mom with those kids, and all of a sudden that time is squeezed out, and the next thing you know, the focus has shifted. And it reminds me of the analogy of if anyone's had the LASIK procedure, where I don't know all of the technical idea, but the focus is to make sure that the light that's entering the eye is directly to the back of the eye. It may be shifted up, it may be shifted down, or whatever, and then some of the things that are done to the eye, it allows the light to come directly to the back and to where the focus is there. Just, you know, there's certain things that happen that can cause us to shift that within a family, and that's where the discussion comes in, where we have to say, okay, it's gut check time here. Do we need to make some adjustments? Do we need to refocus, or how do we stay focused if we are?
So now that we're all learning about LASIK surgery,
and probably someone that is more knowledgeable on LASIK, is I had it 11, 12 years ago, and it's probably changed since then, but I remember a little bit about it, but I'm sure I'll be educated a little bit more. So
this program has not been paid for. 2020. No, but what you're saying makes a whole lot of sense. Imagine a mama or a daddy coming in, or imagine a teenager who comes in, and the fear and anxiety and distraught wins the day in our house.
Yeah.
Give you an analogy. Let's just say that that you're learning to drive a car, and you have your child in the seat. Your child is learning how to drive the car, and you're over in the passenger seat. You're buckled, helmet. You're rejoicing in your salvation, but also terrified at the fact that your child is now driving.
That's right.
They may have a tendency to have one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake, and which is dangerous, very, very dangerous. But just imagine that you're driving and they keep their foot on the brake the whole time. Or you're driving down the road, and because you're so afraid of what possibly could happen, you keep your foot on the brake. Well, over time, those brakes overheat, they wear out, and eventually they're going to quit. They're going to be so exhausted that they're out of pad, and it will be metal on metal, and you'll have no brake whatsoever. You will not be able to stop the train wreck that's about to happen. If I'm not careful, I can come home and be so overwhelming with my anxiety in my own home, whether it be about how my child's behaving or not behaving, how my spouse is responding to Jesus or not responding to Jesus, or what our finances look like, or what this physical illness is going to do to us. If it does anything, are we going to survive it? What's going to happen? I have this. They say I've got 3 months. What about the kids? I understand concern. But if something so outweighs and it's so much anxiety in a home, and all we do is lay on the brake, if you will, we're going to be exhausted.
Oh, yes.
Consuming our homes with constant problems, with anxiousness, with tediousy, with tension, will cause our families to break.
Oh, yes.
I mean, they really will. Verse that comes to my mind is Philippians chapter 4. And verse 4 says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything. Now, he's saying this in context, chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's problems outside of the church. There's problems inside of the church. There's tension in the church. So, and I've been thrown in jail, but this is for your good. Chapter 3, look out for people who are trying to bind circumcision. There's a whole bunch of problems going on. But he says, listen, all of this can serve for the advancement of the gospel. We need to rejoice. And even verse 2 of chapter 4, you got two sisters.
That's right.
These are blood-bought Christians who are in the same house, and yet they're at a disagreement. There's a problem within the church. But he says, listen, the Lord is greater than this problem. He's greater than every one of these problems. There's nothing that is too big for God. There's nothing that God hasn't seen before. He's seen in your life. He knows it. He knew it was coming, and it's going to come in other people's lives.
That's right.
This does not make you significant. What makes you significant is the God that is with you in this situation. We are specifically verse 7. Let the peace of God and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. My dad's in law enforcement. He's seen a lot of bad stuff, and this is his verse. He loves this verse. I know that if I have to exercise and kill somebody, or if I have seen somebody die, or somebody has hung themselves or shot themselves, or whatever happens, whatever gruesome thing that I see in this life, my mind will be guarded as long as I see this world as the Lord sees this world. If I take my eyes off of how the Lord sees things, I'm going to lose my mind. Officers get involved in, they drink when they're off. They get into substance abuse. They beat their families. Officers that are exposed to so much sin over time begin to deteriorate. But this is a promise, not just for police officers, but for everybody. If you'll just see things the way that I see them, I will guard you. If you'll just be thankful, if you'll just rejoice, which is our part, I'll guard you. I'll guard you. What does that look like? I just know that he does it. And that's what we rest in. Verse 8, this is our focus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Basically, if it's Jesus, think about it. If it's not Jesus, don't think about it.
That's right. And a couple of words that to me are just so very comforting is just the idea, going back to verse 7, of the guarding. And knowing, we talked about our part and God's part. Listen, our job is to constantly allow the word, as we've hidden it in our heart, and we've given, our hearts to God, to Him to help mold our minds to where we see things the way that He sees them. And when we do that, and when we give up those anxious feelings, the worry, if you will, the needlessness that's there. And we go back to Matthew 6, in those circumstances that Jesus presents it to the multitude there, it was a factor in their faithfulness, And so if we can do that, the fact that what God's part continuing to do in the promises is that there's this guarding that takes place. How comforting that is to know that even though there is those times like now where we're faced with specific challenges we've not been faced with perhaps ever before, especially those of us maybe that are a little bit younger, that He's going to see us through it. He'll guard us. He'll guard our minds through that entire process. Mm-hmm. That's comforting to me. And then when you come down to verse 8, when he talks about the things that are true, noble, just, pure, lovely, good report, meditate. This is a picture of the mind that is fixated and focused on those things. It's not a picture of spend a moment or two in these things and then, I divorce myself from it from the rest of my day. It's where my entire being and focus mentally is trying to orient toward those things. And I'll do that, Jake, if I can see things the way the Lord sees them. Mm-hmm. I realize that I'm not going to be able to control everything in this life. And so therefore, we realize He is more than capable. And so therefore, in those instances, we stay focused on Him. Our mind is on things that are above. It's on the things that are true and noble and just and all the things that He lists here. And stay there. Mm-hmm. Just allow ourselves to stay there, do our part, and we'll be good.
Let's dial it back. It's mid-90s, early 90s. We're sitting at Granny's kitchen table. And she's cooked a feast. Well, everybody's got up. But you said meditate. I think of a sponge you put in the water and you let it soak. Sitting at the table, Granny's house. There's gravy still on my plate. I look right over and there's a biscuit. I'm going to get that biscuit and I'm going to sop this up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get as much of that as I can. Everybody's done gone, but not me. Everybody's done forsook the table, but not me. I didn't forsake the gravy. I get that bread and I sop that up.
Yeah.
I get it all. I get it all. This last passage, and then we'll hush. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 16. Here's a biscuit situation.
Yeah.
Okay. You got the top half of your biscuit, verse 16. Rejoice always. In the bottom of verse 18, give thanks in all circumstances. Right in the middle, what makes it all gel together is pray without ceasing. Okay, whether that be grape jelly, strawberry jelly, butter, or honey, or Karo syrup, or whatever you got. But rejoice always and giving thanks. It's like watching a movie without a soundtrack. Yeah. You've got parts and plots in a movie, but if there's no music, where would Rocky be without Eye of the Tiger? I'm not watching that.
That's right.
It's horrible acting. I need the music to get me through it. I'm sorry I said that. But that's the truth. 2, 3, and 4, they got better. But anyway, but rejoice always and giving thanks in every circumstance. That is, in the middle of that is prayer. Okay? In order for me to pray, I've got to pray to have the mind. In order for me to rejoice the way the Lord wants me to rejoice, I've got to pray to have the mind. I've got to have the vision, the sight. I need to see it the way He sees it. That in every circumstance, verse 18, this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Yeah. The Lord wants me to pray and rejoice and give thanks in every single circumstance. He just listed a whole bunch of stuff in the previous verses about the work of the church and having peace among yourselves. But you need to admonish the idle. You need to be patient with everybody, strengthen encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak. See that nobody repays you. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. And He says, listen, you need to rejoice, you need to pray, and you need to rejoice. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
So foundational truth is, set your mind where Christ is and on all that is good and true. If it's Jesus, be consumed about it. If it ain't, let Jesus consume Himself about it.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
You have anything else?
No, just, set your mind on things above where Christ is. And Christ is at the right hand of God. In this last passage, for me to think about Jesus and him there and what his role is, how can I not see prayer?
Yeah.
And so, I set my minds there, and I'm having the right mindset throughout my day, but I just can't complete that picture. I just can't complete that command unless I realize Jesus is there at the right hand to aid me, not just because he's able to cleanse my sins, but because he is able to stand before the Father and to utter my name and to say, I've been where he's at.
The overall war is over with.
That's right.
And everything else, he says, I'm going to take care of it.
That's right.
I'm going to get you through it, no matter what it is.
That's right.
Anyway, thank you for your time and your attention. Set your mind where Jesus is. All authority, all rule, forgiveness of sins, yes, but he's there for me day to day.
That's right.
Have a good one.